Even if you receive welfare, you're still poor.
With those words, the two left the house. I lost all my strength and slumped down, sitting weakly. I remembered what Phil had said earlier.
Sure, Ashley, you're independent, but I've always felt my pride as a man being hurt. From now on, I want to build a family with your sister, with Lindsay. So, please divorce me.
I felt like nothing mattered anymore, so I went ahead and signed the divorce papers to make it clear that I wanted out. After some time, I decided to discuss compensation with the two of them, with a lawyer present. Shamelessly, my sister, who's not even related by blood, demanded a share of the assets. However, the lawyer burst out laughing and said, "Aren't you the one on welfare?"
What?
My sister was surprised and shouted out loud because she didn't see it coming. Right after that, when the lawyer placed the documents on the table, my sister's face turned pale. My name is Ashley Reed. My husband Phil and I have been married for 18 years. I am 45 years old, and Phil is 3 years younger at 42. We have a daughter, Rita, who is 17 years old and currently a high school sophomore. She's going to be taking those crucial exams next year to get into college. Phil and I met through work. I was working at a real estate company and Phil was working at a related company. We hit it off over something trivial and started going out privately frequently. Phil has a very delicate personality and often finds it hard to make decisions decisively. Back then, I found his indecisive nature cute and was attracted to him. I wanted to take care of him in various ways. I genuinely felt that way. Also, I have a younger brother who is much younger than me. Initially, I was looking after Phil, projecting my brother onto him, but gradually I became attracted to his manly qualities, and we seriously started dating and got married. Usually indecisive, Phil took the initiative for both the confession and the proposal. In situations that needed decisions, he made them decisively. That gap made me feel that I could safely marry him. Then we had Rita without ever having a serious argument or a marital crisis. Once Rita became an adult, we planned to start a second life as a couple. Well, that's what I thought.
Hey, Ashley, can I stay here for a bit?
Saying that, my sister Lindsay, who had come for an unannounced visit, pulling a large suitcase, arrived. I have a sister besides my brother, and that's the sister standing in front of me. Maybe because of the age difference, I get along well with my brother. However, my sister, who is close in age to me, and I have always had a difficult relationship. Being shorter than my sister, I always ended up with her hand-me-downs. Feeling sorry for me, our parents would buy me a new toy.
Wow, nice. Give me one too.
Saying that, my sister snatched the new doll I had received and pushed her worn-out, broken doll onto me. Her outrageous behavior did not stop there. As cute as taking things might be, it was still bearable. When we started elementary school, she stole all the friends I was close to, and when I got my first boyfriend in high school, she seduced him away from me. Even though I went to different schools to get away from her, she still butted in, and I couldn't have a good time in college. I still don't really like my sister. If possible, I want nothing to do with her. So I studied hard, obtained my real estate license, moved to LA, and lived a life without seeing my sister. Phil and I decided to have a photo wedding just for the two of us. Knowing my sister's personality, my parents kept my marriage a secret. Yet she found out I was here. I was hoping that once Rita started university, I would have some time for myself and my husband.
Huh? Ashley, you live in a pretty nice house for your taste. Is it a detached house? Oh, there's a room available here. I'll use this one.
My sister's shrill scream snapped me back to reality. Hey, you can't just come out of the blue like this. Why are you even here? There's no way you can stay when my husband and daughter are living here too, right? Ignoring my words, my sister started looking around the house. Today is a holiday, but Rita is out attending a summer course. Phil had also been out since morning due to work. Could you please leave before the two of them come back? I asked her repeatedly, but my sister did not listen. Finally, in the evening, the two of them returned home.
Who might you be?
Phil looked puzzled, but my sister greeted him with such charm that you wouldn't guess she's 46.
Nice to meet you. I'm Ashley's sister, Lindsay. When did you marry her? I had no idea because there was no greeting or announcement about your wedding. I was bored, so I went to visit our mom's house and I found a photo from your wedding in her room. She's so secretive, even though we're sisters.
Phil knew I had a sister, so I think he saw her the way I told him, and he seemed a bit concerned. But I definitely noticed it. Phil checking out my gorgeous sister. Rita also returned home with a puzzled look on her face. It's only natural she'd have that look on her face. Suddenly, an aunt she had never met before had barged into our house. But my sister was super determined to talk about us living together.
Ashley, I got fired, and it's tough to manage the rent and living expenses, so I'd like to stay here for a bit.
Well, if it's just for a little while, why not?
What? Not right now. Rita has important exams next year. I was about to say that, but the two of them didn't listen to me and were getting excited on their own.
Actually, I've heard about you from Ashley.
It's fine. Ashley was avoiding me, so you just went along with what she described about me, right? I'm sorry my sister said those things about me to you.
Since then, it's been nonstop chaos every day. My sister didn't do any housework but kept asking for money, and eventually she even started stealing cash from my wallet. This happened just 1 week after my sister moved in. I had repeatedly warned her about this, but she did not listen. Hey, if you need money, at least tell me what you're buying or why you need it. Don't just take it from my wallet.
Huh? Why should I report to you what I'm buying?
Because it's my money. Since she was fired, I wished she would job hunt and quickly move out. However, it didn't seem like she was job hunting. Recently, the times Phil and Lindsay were out seemed to overlap. Phil had said he was working overtime, but there was never any overtime pay included in his salary. I complained about this. Your salary doesn't include overtime pay, right? Then you must properly receive overtime pay. If you can't say it, shall I say it for you?
What? Are you doubting me? I do receive the overtime pay separately, so there's no problem.
Usually gentle, Phil had never raised his voice before. This was enough of a shock for me. Because Phil was not someone who would suddenly shout or blame emotionally. From this point, I started to feel a crisis in our current life. My sister continued to lounge around at home, costing us more and more money. She was consuming more than my daughter Rita, and I could only sigh. I discussed this with our parents. They apologized for their lack of oversight, which led to my sister finding out about my marriage and current home. But it was not our parents' fault. I had been living quietly away from my dear parents, with my husband and daughter, yet my sister was obsessed enough to track me down. She must have been preparing to find out where I lived when she found our wedding photo. Surely even now she is planning to take my things and make me unhappy. I started to doubt whether Lindsay really got fired from her job. Maybe she quit on purpose to disrupt my life. It even began to seem like a possibility. If that was the case, I needed to kick her out of the house as soon as possible. You said you got fired, but if you were enrolled in employment insurance, wouldn't you be eligible for unemployment benefits?
I've always been part-time, so I wasn't enrolled in that kind of stuff. That's why I'm struggling. I could have gone back to our parents' house, but I can't just make my elderly parents take care of me, right? So as an independent adult, it's your responsibility as a sister to take care of me. That's common sense.
I was at a loss for words to her nonsensical response. After dropping out of university, Lindsay had always worked part-time and apparently never had a full-time job. Being confronted with this fact later, I felt it was no wonder her job hunting wasn't going well. 3 months after Lindsay started staying with us, I finally caught her and Phil in the act of cheating. I had suspected it before, but now it was confirmed. One day when a client canceled a meeting, I went to a cafe to pass the time and saw Lindsay and Phil walking together outside. They were holding hands and chatting happily. It's unthinkable for just a brother-in-law and sister-in-law to be holding hands. At that moment, I was certain they were having an affair. After a while, when I had made up my mind, I confronted them at home. So the overtime was a lie after all. Lindsay, you've just been pretending to job hunt while hanging out with Phil. Ugh, the worst. Even at this age, you can't be satisfied without taking something from me? That's why I've always kept the fact that I was married from you. Exploding with emotion as I spoke my mind forcefully, the two of them readily admitted to their affair. Then they started saying things that were even more upsetting.
If I had known such a beautiful person was your sister, I wouldn't have been misled by you to avoid Lindsay. Ashley, you're indeed independent, but I've always felt like my pride as a man was being hurt. From now on, I want to build a family with your sister, with Lindsay. So please, divorce me."
He then presented me with a divorce paper that was already filled out in his section. "Understood. There's no way to rebuild this anymore. Lindsay, Phil, from now on, I won't be looking after any of your financial needs, so just know that." After I said that, Lindsay burst out laughing and said this.
"Even if you receive welfare, you're still poor."
What? Wondering what she was talking about, a half-smiling Phil began to say even more absurd things.
Right. Since custody usually favors the mother, I think it's better for Ashley to be with our daughter. Just do as you like from here.
With those words, the two of them left the house. A few minutes later, Rita came home and was puzzled by how quiet the house had become, so I honestly told her that we were getting a divorce. Initially shocked, Rita seemed somewhat relieved to accept the situation. Sometime later, the divorce was finalized. I decided to discuss compensation with them with a lawyer present. Shamelessly, Lindsay demanded a share of the assets. However, the lawyer burst out laughing and said, "Aren't you the one on welfare?"
What?
Caught off guard by the sudden turn of events, my sister made a startled outcry. Right after that, my sister turned pale when she saw the documents the lawyer had placed on the table.
"There isn't enough money between this couple to divide any assets."
Shocked by those words, Lindsay looked back and forth between Phil and me. Of course, Phil was also surprised to hear that we almost had no assets. Anticipating this, I had taken certain actions right after witnessing Phil and Lindsay cheating. Therefore, between us, the couple, we only had a mere $12,000 in cash. For a couple that had been married for 18 years, this was hardly a believable amount.
"Hey, what's going on? You had a lot of savings, didn't you?"
Phil, completely unable to grasp what was happening, asked this in a panic. Watching him, I felt anger well up inside me. "You really have no interest in Rita at all. Didn't we talk about this? I've been saving up for her education, but I thought I'd transfer it to her account now. You said to do as I like, so I transferred the money I had saved to Rita's account. Almost all of my savings are for education. You know this better than anyone, right? Rita is managing her money herself, and I even paid the gift tax to transfer it to her, so this is no longer considered a couple's savings." I mentioned it with a calm face, and Phil's complexion started to pale as he remembered the conversation.
"So, what makes up the $12,000?
About 80% of it is what I think Phil has been hiding. At this, Phil looked at me as if wondering how I knew.
"You knew about it, and that's why you transferred your savings to Rita, considering the division of assets?"
You agreed to it. Remember, you signed the consent form yourself. With that, Phil became angry.
"I thought it was strange. Why would you ask for my agreement just to do that?"
Phil was visibly regretful as he scratched his head, but since he had signed it himself, he couldn't claim it back now. The lawyer had confirmed that since Phil had consented to the gift to Rita, it was no longer considered marital savings at that point. I didn't want the money I had been saving for Rita all this time to go to these two. That's why it considered a living trust. Hearing this, Lindsay looked stunned, but somehow managed to say to Phil,
"Hey, you said we had plenty of savings. Weren't we supposed to live a luxurious life together? Dividing $12,000 won't amount to much, will it? Why didn't you realize Ashley's intentions sooner?"
While turning pale, Lindsay blamed Phil, but Phil just looked away and kept silent. Phil had been earning little and had a lot of student loans, so he hadn't contributed much to living expenses for a while after we got married. However, this was under agreement. When Phil had discussed the difficulty of contributing to the living expenses, I had said, "Understood. I'll handle all the living expenses, so could you please focus on saving as much money as possible for our retirement?" That's why I had been covering all the living expenses for many years. I thought Phil had been able to save at least $1,000 a month, but when it came down to it, it was less than $10,000. He didn't have to pay living expenses, so saving should have been easy, but Phil had been wastefully spending without my knowledge. That must be it. I had accidentally seen his bank book left on his desk and discovered the savings amount, feeling betrayed. But perhaps he had been saving properly in another account. That faint hope was also betrayed, but now that we were divorced, it didn't matter anymore. Lindsay was finally understanding the gravity of the situation and was visibly shaken, desperately trying to think of what to do next, but apparently coming up with nothing. Knowing that the cash available for division was only $12,000 and seeing Lindsay confused, I decided to tell her more of the truth. I looked at Phil and said, I debated whether to say this, but Phil, you're planning to quit your job, aren't you? Then Phil, who had been avoiding eye contact and keeping silent, suddenly met my gaze. Visibly flustered, Phil moved his eyes left and right as he shouted,
How do you know I'm planning to quit my job? I haven't told anyone but the boss yet.
I thought so when I saw the details. What I pointed out was the fact that no overtime pay was being paid, but I had actually been wondering about a particular section. It was about the use of paid leave. Phil had quit a job related to real estate before and was now working for a construction company, but I had never seen him take more than the minimum 5 days of paid leave. Yet recently I noticed in the payroll statements that Phil's paid leave was being consumed all at once. When you think of using up paid leave all at once, resignation comes to mind. And since then, I had been suspecting their affair, wondering if Phil had decided to quit his job thinking he would get a substantial fortune after divorcing me. I couldn't help but sigh at Phil's overly optimistic thinking that this might actually happen. Well, you were my husband after all, so you should know what kind of work I do and how much wealth I've accumulated. To think you cheat and even choose to quit your job based on that? You really don't think ahead, do you? As I said this, Phil's face turned red. The lawyer's remark to Lindsay about being on welfare meant that the two of them being unemployed together would end up in that situation unless they worked. Lindsay seemed panicked by this further truth, but then she seemed to realize something and exclaimed,
Wait a minute. If you alone can cover Rita's college expenses and living costs, there must be something fishy going on. Got it. You're hiding assets, aren't you? That must be it. Come on, confess already.
Hearing my sister's words, Phil seemed to have a realization as well.
That's right. Lindsay, actually, Ashley owns a lot of real estate, and we need to divide that as assets. Close call. Almost got tricked. Real estate is a significant asset, and we need to split it evenly between us. You've been acting all high and mighty, but you're being sneaky and cheap too.
Watching the two of them laugh about this, I was dumbfounded. Eventually, the lawyer couldn't hold back a chuckle. At that moment, the tension in the air tightened. The lawyer cleared her throat and began to explain the facts calmly.
If we're going to talk about dividing assets, perhaps you should study up first. Phil, as the former husband, you might know this, but Ashley owns the real estate through her company, which is making a profit. A corporation and an individual are separate entities. Ashley's company is her separate property, and it cannot be divided as marital assets.
Convinced by the professional's explanation, the two turned bright red and froze. The lawyer continued.
As for assets that can be considered, typical ones include cars, houses, and cash savings. Furthermore, Phil and Lindsay have practically admitted to the affair. Therefore, Ashley can demand compensation from you two. Let's say $10,000 from Phil and $3,000 from Lindsay.
At those words, their faces contorted.
What? Isn't that high? It was just a few months' relationship.
Yeah. Hey, isn't this normally not even close to $10,000?
The two began making excuses, apparently not expecting this turn of events. However, I promptly rebutted. Oh, who decided that? The market rate is just a guide. Phil, you took paid leave to secretly date my sister, and Lindsay, you didn't even seriously look for a job, but just spent my money frolicking around. The lawyer objectively assessed these facts and settled on these amounts. What? Would you have preferred a higher amount? With that, the two hastily shook their heads. The discussion didn't conclude that day and was adjourned, but I felt a firm reassurance about the situation. 2 weeks later, we met again to discuss. Strangely, Lindsay adopted a defiant attitude and said,
Give me the house and the standard car. Is that what you call compensation like asset division? Then give Phil $12,000 and I'll pay the remaining $1,000 with that, okay?
Her ludicrous statement almost drove me to shout in anger, but I managed to control myself with reason and slowly sorted out the situation. There was still a mortgage on the house, and I had maintained it whenever necessary, so it would probably fetch a decent price if sold. The car, too, was still relatively new, having been bought only 5 years ago. Accepting my sister's terms would mean a loss for me, which I absolutely did not want. Lindsay, did you even do the math? If you consider the money from selling the house and car, you wouldn't say such things, right? Normally, those kinds of discussions aren't for the cheating party like you and Phil to initiate. It's for me to bring up. I couldn't believe how brazen they were. Before I could continue, Phil, sitting next to Lindsay, interrupted with this.
You own assets worth $170 million through your company, right? I don't care if they call you the queen of real estate or whatever, but being so stingy with money despite having such wealth is just too crazy.
Stunned for a moment, I ended up laughing out loud at their ridiculous claims. Given the situation, my sudden laughter froze them. After a good laugh, I returned to a serious expression. So that's all you wanted to say? And why are you playing the victim? Greedy? I'm fine being called greedy. I'd rather keep the money for Rita than give it to a man who would abandon his daughter and a terrible sister who would steal her brother-in-law. They both flinched. As the lawyer said during the previous discussion, if you want to use legal terms, you really should study more. What made them think they could say such a thing? I decided to slowly dismantle their plans. Phil, the house is registered in my name, right?
I know that, but we've been living together all this time.
So what? I bought it on a mortgage before we got married, so no matter what, it remains my separate property. The car was bought new. It's accident-free and violation-free, and this model sells for a good price, so if you want to take it, you need to pay me half the appraisal value. That's the rule for property division. We own 2 cars. One is a new car we've been discussing. The other is a used compact car, which probably won't fetch much.
But the lawyer said that houses and cars are subject to property division.
Without thinking, my sister took those words at face value. However, that's not what it meant. Look, the lawyer was just telling the main items that could be included in property division, not saying they would definitely be included this time. What we need to divide between us is just a combined $12,000 from Phil's hidden savings and my savings, plus the 2 cars. That's all. Unaware of this, and with Phil not having thought deeply about it, they found themselves in a bind again. Phil seemed to ponder over various things, but eventually, not knowing what to do, he pleaded with me.
So, could you just give me enough money to start a new life, please?
But he didn't seem remorseful. It just seemed like he was apologizing to solve the problem at hand. I don't need such a shallow apology. I hardened my heart and responded. Given how you are, it seems like you wouldn't want to pay child support for Rita either. So there's no room for compromise, is there? Why should I worry about your living expenses? After I firmly stated this, they realized that no matter what they said, I wouldn't budge, and they reluctantly signed the relevant documents. Sometime after the divorce and the division of assets were settled, I kept getting calls from my sister.
Hey, why did Phil have so much debt? You were paying the living expenses, right? Then what was the point of getting into debt? What's going on?
She was screaming over the phone. While holding back a sigh, I calmly explained the facts. It's obvious, isn't it? The fact that he had less than $10,000 saved up, despite having years to do so, should have told you everything. Does it mean he was making big purchases or had set up car loans? Something like that? When I asked in exasperation, my sister desperately explained her current situation.
Yes, exactly. He took out loans worth several thousands just to pay meaningless luxury brands. And then the credit card payments turned into a nightmare because they were set to revolving credit without knowing. When we looked into it, this guy was just a dangerous debtor. How could you saddle me with such a person?
Well, you didn't get saddled with him. You stole him from me. I retorted with a half smile, and my sister fell silent. It seems Phil has been incurring debts even without my knowledge. Now I'm getting several collection letters. He had hidden it while we were together, but probably let his guard down after changing addresses. Or, maybe being Phil, he got too caught up in his new life and forgot to hide it. Oh, there's one more thing I didn't tell you, Lindsay.
What now?
She was completely terrified, but I had remembered something upon hearing about the debts. Phil mentioned he was in construction, but it's really just his own one-man show. There, they withhold income tax and resident tax, but he needs to manage all other necessary payments himself. I run my own business, so I handle national pension and national health insurance myself, and when Phil quit his job in real estate, I also switched Rita to national health insurance to manage it. I have been handling my own resident tax and other matters, but it turned out that Phil had not been paying his national pension since a year ago when he changed jobs. I was handling the national health insurance payments, so that was not an issue. Due to some mistake, we received a dunning letter for the national pension at our house. I contacted Phil to get permission to open it, and it turned out to be a dunning letter. It seems he had been hiding it all along because I had no idea. I pay my own national pension, and I assumed Phil was paying his too. When I called Phil to ask if I could open the dunning letter, he begged for help, almost in tears.
National pension costs this much? No way, man. I can't pay this. We were a family, weren't we? Help me out, will ya?
Huh? What are you talking about? Are those the words of the very person who abandoned his wife and child? Once again, my logic left Phil speechless. Talking about this made him realize there was no hope, and it seemed like my sister, on the other end of the phone, had also lost her words out of despair. That's the situation, so you'll have to figure it out yourselves. With that, I hung up the phone. Eventually, Phil called back complaining about the high taxes on the car he took and that he hadn't expected the vehicle inspection to be so costly.
Man, maintaining a car costs this much? I was shocked. I thought the taxes would be a few $10, but it was in the hundreds. And the car inspection costs this much too? It's tough, huh? Won't you take it back?
No. After my brief response, Phil hung up, disappointed. Subsequently, he sent emails begging for help, but when I warned him, if you keep this up, I'll consider it stalking and consult the police, he stopped immediately. From now on, an even tougher hell awaits the two of them. Later, it seems that Phil and Lindsay got divorced. Their marriage lasted only 3 months after he divorced me. The plan probably went awry when they realized the single-family home registered in my name was not subject to property division. Getting married while carrying debts and compensation in the tens of thousands was never going to work out. Moreover, it seems their post-divorce squabbles were even worse than when he was with me. Lindsay is someone who clings to money.
Sell the new car. Keeping it is a waste. Better to turn it into cash, right?
What? The small change doesn't matter. Besides, I paid all of your compensation, so if we're divorcing, give me that money back.
Such trivial quarrels apparently delayed their divorce. Eventually, they did divorce, but Phil seems to have chosen the path of bankruptcy. Since I had already collected the lump sum compensation payment, it didn't affect me. However, now Phil was unemployed, penniless, and ultimately became homeless. Of course, having said he would quit his job, he couldn't take back his words and left the company. His unnecessary pride prevented him from applying for welfare. Now he's probably living a miserable life, begging like a beggar. Divine retribution has struck Lindsay. Despite stealing her sister's husband and cheating, she was divorced after only 3 months, a fact that became well known around her, ruining her social relationships. Naturally, her family and relatives disowned her. Also, no company would want to hire someone like my sister, so her job search remains difficult. Even if she gets hired for a part-time job, her terrible attitude of never being wrong leads to her being fired in an instant. The lawyer's words about being eligible for welfare became reality, and now Lindsay is persistently at the welfare office trying to get support. However, because she continues to hold on to any potentially valuable personal belongings, she hasn't been able to receive welfare and got kicked out of her apartment, ending up homeless like Phil. Since she trampled on my and Rita's feelings with her selfish actions, this punishment seems only fair. Now it's just the two of us living, and our days are unremarkably peaceful. Rita, who used to receive nothing but complaints about studying and going to a good university from Phil, says she felt relieved after he was gone. And she brilliantly passed her exams and got into a national university. Watching my daughter start university this spring, I am once again moved. My work is busily rewarding, and although I'll soon be 46, I am still healthy. I think to myself that I must keep going even harder.